Hi, I'm Colton, and here is a look at how I created the Ironman Terrain using data from the National Map and Blender. So here we go. First I'm finding it in Google Earth and then copying that over to the National Map website where I'm gathering the orthos and DEMs. Now I import that data into QGIS, which is a GIS software that's free. That lets you export data from the DEMs into an image file that you can open in Photoshop or other imaging programs. So right now I'm exporting the basically the height data from the area that I want, as well as the orthos, which is the satellite image. Bringing that all into Photoshop. The exports from QGIS are in 32-bit, so I have to convert those to 16-bit and use some gamma correction to get them into a form that preserves the proper relationships between the different height values. So that's what I'm doing here, as well as kind of normalizing the heights. So I kind of have a full range between white and black in the area that I've selected. I'm also dealing with two different types of projection. Basically, the way that the DEM maps are projected from the sphere of the Earth can be done in a lot of different ways, and it's kind of confusing, but basically you can automatically adjust it through QGIS to match the orthos, but that gives these kind of artifacts that you can see. So I also exported the uncorrected versions and am here kind of trying to match those two up to try and get the best of both worlds. Took a little experimentation and messing around in Photoshop, but I think I got something that worked. Now I'll export that from Photoshop and import it into Blender to kind of get my base terrain, but first I'm getting measurements from QGIS so that my Blender terrain can match the real world distances. Basically, each foot in Blender is a real world foot, so that when I go to build the track, I have a good reference for the size of things, as well as kind of a number to go off of when I create the terrain HF for MXS, which kind of determines the scale of the track. So basically I'm just comparing my imported terrains in Blender to Google Earth to make sure that, you know, I'm on the right track. And now here I'm basically setting my bounds for what will eventually be the terrain PNG that will go into MXS. So this kind of outline defines where the actual MXS terrain will be. Here I'm just grabbing a higher resolution version of the satellite image from Google Earth so I can see it. And now I'm actually starting the work in Blender on building the track. So the first thing I do is create a plane and start basically extruding it along the track. I'm not worrying about elevation or anything at this point. I'm basically just trying to get a general outline of the track path. And it can be super rough because eventually I'm going to go and add a subdivision surface modifier to this, which will smooth out all the corners. And also once I start getting into the actual building of the terrain, which you'll see in a bit, I'll be adding a lot more vertices to kind of refine the actual shape of this. So yeah, right now I'm just quickly tracing out the general width and shape of the track. And now as I finish that up, I'll apply the subsurf modifier and then just go through another lap tweaking the edges. Basically, now that the modifier is applied, just checking to make sure that the edges of my track path match up with what I see on the satellite image. Extruding a little section for the start. And then here I snap my vertices to the underlying terrain, so that quickly gets me the overall vertical shape of the track, which is just the general elevation changes that everything will be built upon. And I've got a reference video pulled up from FileMX that I'm using to help guide me through the the shape of the track, as I am now starting to refine the hills and start building some jumps. As you can see, basically it's a matter of moving vertices around vertically, as well as just kind of shifting them XY plane, as well as adding edge loops as needed to basically give me the resolution necessary to create the jumps that I want. The subsurf modifier is great because it naturally gives you these nice curves, as you can see on the face of jumps and things like that, so it's not a whole lot of work to kind of get a jump shape that works nicely in MXS. By adding a few edge loops close together, you can kind of peek it out more, and then edge loops farther apart give you more rounder transitions. If you have done any kind of subsurf modeling in Blender, I'm sure all of this is super basic stuff. A lot of what I do in sections like this is just try and level out my vertices side to side so that the track is as level across as it goes up the hill, and I kind of shape this big uphill triple into the hillside. Constantly going back to reference videos or reference pictures. I don't know, that's just kind of my style. I really try to capture the real essence of the track as much as possible, at least in these early stages, and then once I actually get the track into MXS and start writing it, then you can kind of start tweaking it and kind of optimizing it for the game physics. But at this point, I'm basically just trying to get the whole track out there, like I said, as close to the real thing as possible, not doing a whole bunch of going back and forth, writing and building. Basically, I just want to get it all out first, kind of a rough draft, and then once I kind of get like the basic overall track in there, I will go in and start really writing and fine-tuning things. You may notice I'm not really focusing too much on berms or kind of banks in the corners. Right now I've just got the sets of vertices on each side of the track, nothing down the middle. I like to get just the overall path and jumps in first, and then once I kind of get all this down, I'll go in and add an edge loop basically down the center of the entire track, and that will give me basically the vertices I need to start tweaking berms and turn shapes and stuff. But right now I'm focused, like I said, on the jumps and overall elevation. This section, as you'll probably see later, turned out to be fairly tricky, just because you can get so much speed coming into that camelback. It was hard to keep people from just sending it through that whole rhythm section. But like I said, here I'm just trying to get the basics in there. So now as I finish up this first pass around the track and kind of get everything in there, next step is to export this to a disk map, which I can bring into MXS and start writing and figure out what needs to be done next. So we'll look at that in part 2, and until then, have a good one.